What are the differences when it comes to setting up deals between the East and the West?
Hey everybody, my name is Andrew Tran. I'm a marketing branding strategist. I help organizations, their teams, their team leaders deliver and execute on the challenges they're facing, from marketing campaigns to market entry activity, all the way through to strategy and planning. If you want to hit me up, check out my website. It's www.andrewtran.asia. You can find out a little bit more about me. You can book time with me. But until then, let's get on with the show. My next guest is Steve McGinnes. He's an author, a strategy consultant, commentator, speaker, and running his consultancy, Hummingbird Group, from Singapore. He's been featured on BBC World News as their regional Asia expert, recently released his book, Surfing the Asia Wave, and has worked across some of the biggest brand names, including Diageo, Unilever, Nestle, and more. We got straight into it. We talked about his book, we talked about Asia in general, we talked about the convergence of East and West, digital marketing here in Asia, all things Asia. We talked about the tips and tricks of what to expect when you try to do business here. I want to get straight into it. So without further ado, give it up for Steve McGinnes.
Steven, how's things going?
Hi mate, how you doing? All good this end. How are you?
Oh, all good at the moment. Where are you at the moment? You at your place?
Yeah, I am. I'm floating around Singapore, making a move up to Thailand in a few days. COVID travel permitting, but right now I'm on a beautiful sunny afternoon here in Singapore.
Nice. That looks amazing right now. All right. So today's theme, we want to talk about your book, and also kind of getting your thoughts. So for those who have just listened and you've skipped the intro part, you're a man that has, started off in the UK, and then you're based here. You've been basing yourself here in Singapore for 15 years now. So for those who aren't familiar with your work, how did one kind of start off in London and then ended up in Singapore?
Well, I think my move to Asia, or my final move to Asia, I've been dipping in and out for a while previous to my move over. My move over actually is the perfect epitome, an example of the West and Asia sort of divergence. So I was working for an agency in the UK. We were pitching for a big Asian client, and we came over for the usual kind of pitch process, the usual conversations. And we of course came over with our pitch team, the all singing, all dancing front end team, knowing that, we'd set that up, the paperwork would be in place, we'd back off, in would come the project team. And then as the project got further along, they'd ease out and the execution team would come in, and we'd slowly transition these people over. The client, on the other hand, being Asia-based, completely saw this not as a transactional conversation about agency or about process or about creds. They saw it as a relationship build. So they'd seen the same team come out twice. They'd had conversations with them. So they presumed that the people they were meeting as part of that initial relationship build were going to run the project. So the conversation came through, and that had a moment of awkwardness when the client awarded us the project, but when they realized that we weren't going to be the people running the work. So they were very clear that, no, we've awarded the project to the people in this room. We have a relationship with you, not with the company, not with some people in London. And if you're taking this project on, we want the people that we have the relationship with to run it, which meant myself and a small handful of other people relocating to Asia, specifically to run that project at the behest of the client. That initially 3-day pitch presentation became a 3-month project engagement, became a 2-month contract, became 15 years out here. And the thing you do for a while becomes the thing you do. I love Asia. I love the energy. I love the optimism. I love the fact that people you meet here and businesses you talk to expect next year to be better than this year. I would find it very hard to move back to Australia or America or the UK, where the general feeling seems to be things are getting worse. I like the positivity and the focus on the road ahead that you have here. So I think I'm an Asia lifer now.
Yeah, the Asia lifestyle is so exciting right now. Like it's you see places like America, UK, Australia, you know, there's just so much political turmoil going on at the moment. A lot of protectionism that's occurring at the moment. And, you know, the economy in itself is regressing at the very worst, and at the very best, sorry, it's only barely moving the needle, if anything. Whereas here in Asia, like, you know, it's always in this like double digit kind of growth year on year. And if it's a single digit growth, it's considered a panic mode, even though it's still kind of growing. So I think it's amazing, man.
Well, that's the fascinating thing. My personal feeling is that the sort of macroeconomic and power changes that are going to be happening over the next 5 to 15 years are happening in the space of 5 to 15 months. So I think what's happened with COVID and the international economies, and how, as you say, the leadership have handled those challenges, I think has really fast forwarded those shifts. So you're looking at, you know, the UK, Europe, Australia, America, looking at perhaps -5, -8, -10% GDP this year and into next year. You're looking at China, India, Indonesia at +2, +4, +5% growth. Now, that isn't the double-digit growth we'd got used to, but it's growth. And if you compare a -5 or -6 in the UK to a +5, +6 in Indonesia, that's a 10-point gap. And admittedly, you know, Indonesia is coming from behind, but that's 400 million people coming from behind across ASEAN. You've got, you know, the third or fourth, you know, most populous nation, national area in the world, moving forward at that rate of knots. And I think to a degree, not just economically, but as leaders, as nations and cultures to aspire to, the West is losing its halo. You know, when we look at how the Western leaders are handling COVID, we look at how they're reacting to the dissent and to the pushbacks in their own countries. Why would, you know, an Indonesian consumer or a Chinese consumer or a Vietnamese consumer, why would they look at the West and go, oh, I want brands that come from there, I aspire to that? Why can we assume that's the case now? I don't think we can. I think we need to relook at how the Western brands approach Asia overall from a much more humble position than the one we've had before. But yeah, and that's, again, that's the beauty of being here while that's happening. It's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. And like, just it kind of moves onto this first segment around your novel, your book, Surfing the Asian Wave. And, you know, as I was doing this research, I came across something that you said. You talked about like tolerance and understanding. And I would love for you, if you can, to expand over that, like what you kind of meant by that.
Well, I think there's two levels. Now, personally, I believe the biggest hurdle that we have regarding sort of global empathy, the biggest hurdle most individuals and most brands, most businesses have to overcome is just the acknowledgement and acceptance that there is a difference. I think most people and most companies blindly wander through their lives on the misguided belief that the way they see the world is the way that everybody sees the world. So I think before we can start thinking about what are the major differences, you know, is it about relationships, is it about power, is it about family? Before we can start thinking about what are those differences, the big leap is acknowledging that the difference is there. And I'd say most people don't even see that. So I think the first step in empathy or understanding is appreciation of that gap. Then I think we can start to understand where the other person's coming from, but we need to understand that they're coming from a different place. And from the book, if the only thing people take away from the book is the understanding that there is a different viewpoint in the world, for me, that would be a huge leap. I wrote a book that I wish I'd been able to read 15 years ago. It would have saved me a lot of trouble. It would have saved a lot of money. It would have saved a lot of companies I've worked for a lot of money if I'd known some of these basics. And it's not an exhaustive study. It's, I hope, as entertaining as it is educational. But somebody mentioned to me that they estimated that there's billions of dollars of other people's mistakes in the book that you can learn about and perhaps, you know, save yourself a fraction of that trouble and cost.
I definitely recommend that book, especially for anyone that is trying to move into the Asian market from the West. Now that you're also seeing like the geopolitical kind of scenario happening with China and America, you're seeing like some of these smaller Southeast nations being like the recipients, I guess, of this kind of trade war that's occurring at the moment.
Yeah.
Vietnam being one of them as well. And so I think it kind of comes onto this kind of next question that I was kind of thinking of, which was around like setting up those, you know, those deals. Like, I mean, you yourself, like talking about your story, coming to Asia as well, like initially just becoming like, you know, part of the planning project and then kind of expanding that 15 years on. You know, what are the differences? I think you might have explained before, but I'd love for you to expand on it. I guess, what are the differences when it comes to setting up deals between the East and the West?
Well, I think the key difference is one between transactional and relationships. I think more and more so, the West, we are placing value on the transactional nature and the functional nature of a relationship. I mean, I know of project where the procurement teams, the acquisition teams, where the vendors aren't even allowed to meet the client, because somehow that will, you know, that will remove the objectivity. So you can't even meet each other until the deal is done. So this idea being that you look at things logically and formally and functionally, and you evaluate prices and etc. And then the deal is put in place. And then over a period of time, you build that relationship. And that, if I think as things become more and more globalized and more decentralized, it's become even more the case. Relationship importance is diminishing even further within Western businesses. Whereas in Asia, it's completely the other way around. Absolutely 180 degree from that. The relationship is built up over a period of time, months, perhaps years it takes to build up that relationship. And within that build up of a relationship, it's not just a question of time. One of the common misconceptions is, oh, it takes longer to do a deal in Asia, therefore I will just build more time into my plan. Well, no, if you're expecting it to take a month, you're in Asia and you make it 6 months, that's absolutely pointless, because it's not the amount of time, it's what happens during that time that counts. So you can't just give yourself an extra 5 months and then sit back and wait. That 6 months or year is when you build the relationship. It's when you explore each other's networks. It's when you have opportunity to display character. It's when you get to know each other. It's when you start building some depth into that. It's not just a chronological thing. It's about increasing number of touch points and relationship points and network points and points of similarity and points of trust. With all of that done, then the deal can get inked. The I's can get dotted and the T's can get crossed. And then the relationship can go forward as a functional project relationship. And often, I think in the West, we see the relationship building, if we have to do it, as being something that's on the edge. It's a nice to do. It's a, if we've got time, let's have lunch, but really we're here to crunch numbers. And that is a huge missed opportunity. We really need to completely flip away that and look at it purely as the relationship is primary. The relationship may take years. The relationship may go on beyond the individuals and between two businesses, where the relationship needs handing over as much as the functional information. And I think that's where we get things wrong. The other element, I think, where we're looking at it through the wrong end of the telescope is perhaps the assumption that as Westerners, we need to build up a level of tolerable understanding of Asia for when we go and do business in Asia. Increasingly and quietly, as much as Western businesses are going in and entering Asian markets, or Western businesses are buying Asian companies, of which we make a big fuss and a lot of noise, and we make a big hurrah about it. On the other way, I would say more now are Asian businesses entering the West and Asian companies buying Western businesses. So how do you behave when your company is bought by an Asian company? How does your power dynamic change? How does your way of working change? How do your relationships need to change very quickly? Because for all intents and purposes, you're working in Asia. Even if your office may be in New York, or it may be in Newcastle. But if you've been bought by an Indian or Indonesian or Chinese or Japanese company, you may as well be on their soil. And I think those are the flips. It's relationship versus function, and it's just the nature of how those relationships work. I think those would be the two key things, whether it's a multinational business takeover or whether it's a couple of guys, hustling, their way through Ho Chi Minh City or Shanghai. I think is how we need to look at it, the power shift and the structural dynamical change.
Yeah, you make a good point about like multiple meetings and that expanded time, like, personal experience wise, like I came here about 9 months ago and, I set myself some quick goals to meet these people, to try and set up some deals really quickly. And to be quite honest, it took forever. And part of that, it wasn't a frustration, but it was just a realization that, oh, wait, I need to spend this time because they don't, first off, I'm a visitor in their country, even though I look like, I look Asian, I look the same, but I'm essentially a visitor. Secondly, like I have to build those relationships up. And it was something that was taught to me as well through talking to some of the Chamber of Commerce's, like literally like they said to me, hey, 2 years. And I'm like, what? It's like 2 years. If you can survive 2 years, find a way to survive for 2 years, like you would have proven to people around you in the community, in the expat community and so on and so forth that, hey, you're here for the long run. You're not just here to like kind of in and out, quick deal. Like you're there. We can trust you. We can build a relationship with you. So yeah.
And exactly. I think it goes all the way up. One of the guys in the book, very, very lovely guy, very smart guy, a German diplomat, and he was talking about the ASEAN West trade conferences and summits they would have. And, the Western guys, the senior guys would come if they were able. Whereas the Asian guys realized that it wasn't an option. If you wanted to be part of what was going on, you had to be there. And it wasn't just someone being there. It had to be, so it's not just about the amount of time in the relationship, it's who you're bringing to the party. So that there's no point in sending a junior person just to show face, because actually that's worse than showing nobody at all. That's saying, hey, I understand someone needs to be there, but we're not going to bother with anybody decent. And what they would do at the Singapore trade summits is if junior people turned up, they'd get a plastic chair. Whereas if the senior people turned up, they get the proper comfy sort of a conference chair. And that's how they showed their displeasure. Nobody was going to say, well, no, go away. But it was clearly not appreciated when, a junior sub-minister rocked up. Because it's not just what you say or how you show face, it's who's there as well. And it's very important to be matching people with people, and trying to get, for people like ourselves, to as high a conversation point as possible, but also being aware that sometimes we need to be aware that there are people perhaps that we need to approach in different ways or with different people within our teams.
Yeah. And I like, cause I'm Asian as well. I grew up in an Asian household, generation zero, first generation Australian, Chinese, Vietnamese. And so, those Eastern kind of cultures to me was quite normal. So, the two-handed carded kind of approach, the serving holders, saying sir, ma'am, like to me, that was quite normal. But then, you're seeing all these these videos out there, how to greet someone from China, like something ridiculous like that. It's like, oh, yeah. Okay. So yeah, the dynamic has shifted quite a bit.
But that's also, I think sometimes that can be a mistake because as you're saying, I mean, it's relatively straightforward to go online and find out how to hand a card, or you can find a book on, on cultural differences and find out where you're supposed to sit at the table. But when you read the Economist did a study and it showed that out of international mergers that failed, 70% of those failures were attributed to cultural differences. Now, I don't believe that's because they gave the card out the wrong way, or they sat in the wrong chair, or the gift was wrong, because that stuff's taken care of. There's people surrounding CEOs and VPs making sure that they give the card out the right way. My belief is that when those things failed, it's just because there was fundamental differences in terms of vision and in terms of views and in terms of priorities, that not only were the two sides different about, they didn't even realize they were different. So when you talk about things, you know, we can get the card handing over correct, we can, you know, pass the tea the right way. But if you don't understand that your idea of a long-term plan is 6 to 12 months, and the person on the other side of the table's idea of a long-term plan is 20 to 30 years, and you've got two teams working towards something that are completely different, you might not even understand this, but you're just so misaligned, or what you believe that the value you want to come from a relationship is. If one of you is looking about expansion, one of you is looking at profit, one is looking at long term, one is looking at short term, one of you is team is fixated on their own short term personal development, professional development, and the other side of the table is thinking about reputation and legacy. I think that's where the cultural failures are, not so much the, you know, handing the card out the wrong way. Although, of course, that is kind of a housekeeping to have to do, you know, where you sit, how you talk, how you address people, starting the meeting before the senior people are there, you know, those kind of things. But I think those are the things that can be picked up quite straightforward.
Yep.
And there's no excuse to get wrong. But it's those deeper, more fundamental things that perhaps are more of a handicap, and other things that scupper relationships without either side really understanding what went wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Like just jumping along, like, I mean, we're talking about, I know there's a, what do you call it? It's nothing, it's not like, it's more like a, it's not really a tangible thing. It's an intangible element, right? That there's challenges or differences between East and West. For large and small companies, like what are some of the other challenges that you've kind of seen, that you've seen like a lot of Western companies try to come into Asia, try to come to the Asian market and try to dominate and fail?
I think you probably bucket into three main points. The first one is working on the assumption that the market is just sitting here patiently waiting for you to arrive. You know, that somehow there's been a gap in the market with a real need that just nobody has filled. Because that's, of course, complete nonsense. If there's a genuine human need, somebody will have filled it by now. You may be able to offer a better version of it, or you may be able to offer a more efficient or more rewarding version of it. But basically, nobody's sitting around waiting for a Western company to come in and solve an existing problem. The second is that when there is a need that you've established and you've spotted and you're able to fulfill better than the current offer, is that you're talking about it the wrong way. Is that you go into the market talking about the things that are important to you and are important to your home market. So you may be very proud of the fact you've had the same recipe for 200 years. You might be very proud of the fact that everything's made in this tiny little town on the side of a mountain. But in China, who gives a shit? You know, you may be in the habit of talking about your 200-year heritage, but talking to a market that actually, if something's more than 2 years old, it's out of date. Who cares? So we assume that there's a need for filling, and then we assume that people are going to be motivated and turned on by the same things that turn on us as brand owners and our market where we are before. And I guess the third is really just then this how we talk about it. You know, what is the need? What are we talking about? And increasingly, brands get caught up in functionality. What is the physical thing that the product does? What is the hidden ingredient? What is the secret X ingredient factor? And in fact, people, particularly in Asia, where you might be second generation, first generation of having the ability to buy things that you choose, it's about utility. Don't tell me what it does. Tell me what it does for me. And increasingly, tell me what it does for me today. You know, my world is too volatile to talk about what this is going to do to me in 50 years or 60 years. Tell me about today. So does it give me white teeth today? Yeah, tell me that. Functionality, yeah. Utility is my key point. And I think whether it's a telco, whether it's a bicycle company, whether it's toilet paper, that I think are the key bits. don't assume that the market's waiting for you. Don't assume you can talk about the same things, and stop banging on about what your product does and start talking about what the product does for the person that you're selling it to. Those, I think, would be the key factors.
I like how you talk about the value of the customer. Like, what does this product or service bring to your customer? How does it help their customer do X, Y, and Z? You talked about localization, which is so important. I see so many brands, and especially when they underinvest to go into a new market, they believe, oh, Asia is cheap, so it's like a third. Like, the cost of living is only like a third of what we have in the States or in the UK. So we're just gonna invest appropriately, like a third, and they create this bullshit of a magical number coming through. But they don't realize that they need to take time. I think there's a really good story out there. I think with was it Nescafe, when they try to go into the Japanese market to try and sell coffee, and Japan, like, they don't drink coffee. I mean, back then, so they were trying to figure out ways to. It's a really famous story. You might have known it, so they had to, like, they created chocolate. They created candy, or
coffee candy.
And then slowly but surely, like, they kind of built this tolerance, this familiarity with coffee, the aroma, the culture behind it. And that's when they could bring in some of that kind of really cool culture around coffee, like in Europe and the bourgeois of whatever. So, yeah.
And sometimes it needs that. Sometimes you need to enter a market through a proxy. There's something that already exists. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that we take as being written in stone, but are really just arbitrary decisions somebody made a long time ago. And a good example is, so why is toothpaste mint?
Don't know.
I don't know. So someone, some point, made toothpaste mint. Now toothpaste is mint. If you go to the Philippines, a lot of people, will brush their teeth and clean their teeth with salt water. So for them, clean teeth is associated with the taste of salt. So you have successful toothpaste brands there that, instead of being mint flavored, are salt flavored. Or you move into people that are looking at green tea flavored toothpastes. Again, it's an arbitrary point for us. Why is mint toothpaste? I did some projects with some people working into Indonesia, bringing in high-end cheese into Indonesia. And the pushback was, no, cheese doesn't taste like that. And telling a French guy, a French cheese importer, no, that doesn't taste like cheese. That's not cheese. He's like, but this is my cheese. But all the time before that point, for most Indonesians, the taste of cheese was actually the orange dusting on snacks. That's what cheese tasted like. So when you believe cheese tastes like what goes on, some mac and cheese, or on a crispy curl or something, you've then got to a whole education point of, no, this is what cheese really tastes like, and therefore this is good cheese. You've got to step back from the whole thing, as you said, because otherwise you're just assuming that everybody's seeing the world the same way that you are. I remember working on a project for a non-alcoholic beer in Indonesia. Now, the non-alcoholic beer was only being developed as a proxy for the main beer, because you can't advertise alcohol in Indonesia. It's a dark market. So they're developing a non-alcoholic beer that they could advertise, which would, in effect, then act as advertising for their standard beer. But sales went through the roof immediately. And this was sort of 10 years ago, before the global non-alcoholic beer push happened, because there was a whole untapped market of Indonesian guys who couldn't drink because of religion, but wanted all the associative actions and activities and fun that they saw in the movies. They wanted beer moments, but they didn't want the alcohol. And that didn't occur to the beer company at all. They always saw non-alcoholic beer as this thing they did, but weren't particularly interested in. And it flipped out of nowhere. They looked at it the other way. And another one I love is KFC. You look at KFC in Indonesia, there's tens of thousands of KFC outlets, but only a fraction of that number of McDonald's. KFC had a huge amount of leeway because of a franchise to adapt to the local needs. So KFC in Indonesia isn't playing the same role it plays in the West. In the West, it's fast, it's cheap. In Indonesia, the hawker centers are faster and they're cheaper. It can't be fast and cheap. So in Indonesia, KFC at one point was the largest music retailer in the country. People bought CDs there. Every evening, there's live music. On the weekend, there's DJs. Because KFC doesn't play the role of a fast food restaurant. KFC plays the role of a bar. In a country where most people can't drink, KFC is where young people go to hang out in the evenings. So they've got a different offer. So they've moved, they've maneuvered, and they haven't assumed that the market wants what they have to sell. They've allowed themselves to adjust and adapt and stay true to their overall brand identity. And I think that's why there's something like 15 or 20 times the number of KFCs as there are McDonald's. Simply because they didn't assume that the market was waiting for them and would accept exactly the same offer as they were giving out in the West, to take your point exactly.
Yeah. Actually, another good example is Pizza Hut. Like Pizza Hut back home is just fast, like it's fast pizza. You don't even sit down anymore, like you would back in the 80s and 90s where there was actually a Pizza Hut place. Yeah. And so, but here in Asia, it's a restaurant. It's a full restaurant, and it's considered quite premium, actually, to be quite honest. Yeah, because the ingredients are quite premium and everything.
Yeah, the QSR places in India or Indonesia, they're always on prime real estate locations, and they've always got windows out onto the street. So you can sit there in the window and people can see you in there eating your KFC or your Pizza Hut or whatever it is you're going for, because it's a display. It's I'm out, I've got money, I'm successful, as opposed to just a functional decision in our part, which is I'm hungry right now, what's quick? I think you're absolutely right.
Yep. So moving on, like I know time's pretty stretched out at the moment, but I always ask advice time with all my guests. And so now, because we're talking about Asia, moving into Asia, some of the pitfalls around it. If I was a company, if you're advising a company, a small to medium or large company coming to Asia, what would you advise them on?
Do it quickly. Do it quickly. Do it now. There's never going to be a perfect time to do it. You're always going to be having problems at home. The market is always going to be volatile. You're never going to know enough, but there's never going to be the right time to do it. If you don't do it now, when the Western economies are on the bones of their arse, as my father would say, when are you going to do it? Are you going to do it when they recover? No. Do it now. Do it before the gap between the Western and the Asian economies is too big for you to be able to jump. Better to get in there now and adapt on the ground than it is to hold off, because the boat's leaving. The wave is coming over and you're either on the right side or the wrong side of history at this point.
Yep. I totally, definitely agree. And this is a good segue for people to find out about you. So if for those who are trying to look out for you, go, you know what, Stephen, you sold me. I read the book. I'm done. I want to go to Asia. How do they find you?
Well, the book is available in good bookshops and also bad bookshops, it turns out. Or you can find me at stevemcginnes.com or my LinkedIn, Stephen McGinnes, or just direct email it's steve@thehummingbird.perspective.com. But my LinkedIn or my website, or again, I suspect through you, would be a great place to start. So thanks for the opportunity to have a chat. It's always great fun.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure having you on. And for anyone who's watching or listening, I'll put all the show notes I'll put all the notes down in the show notes below, all your details and everything like that. But Stephen, thank you so much for coming on to the show, sharing your insights and everything. I'm looking forward to chatting to you further down the line as well, and seeing your growth through media as well. And for anyone else who's watching and listening, thank you so much. I'll see you in the next show.